to Esther, and thank you everyone who's joined us for our session so far. As I said, we're going to be recording this for the rest of our team who are currently seeing our patients, but it's fabulous to be able to host Esther. So Esther's joined us from the US, and she started this by saying that she's delighted not having to travel all the way to New Zealand because it is a very long way to go, of course, and she's currently based in Napa in California, which is meant to be beautiful and warm this time of the year, but she just shared with us that it's been snowing today unbelievably. So there's something for you in terms of climate change. Now, Esther is famous for three things: teaching a high school class that has changed the lives of thousands of children. She's inspired icons like Steve Jobs and raised three successful daughters. And I guess you have to ask, what do you have in common with these things? And it's really part of Esther's parenting philosophy, which has come down to TRICK, which is the acronym that she uses to describe how she recommends that people think of and speak to their children. So a few years ago, I actually read Esther's book, and I thought it was a really interesting take. There are so many parenting books out there, and there's lots of amazing different philosophies. And I think Esther forms a really interesting view in terms of what she thinks drives happy and successful people and how to empower children to be the best that they can be. So as a mother of three nowadays, I still am getting used to saying that with our three kids of all different ages, 10, 6, an 8-month-old Charlie, who you might hear crying in the background because he's just got his grandparents in charge right now. It is a pleasure to have Esther here today. She is a leading American educator and journalist. She's the mother of YouTube CEO Susan, and I'm going to have to get you to correct me on your last name, Esther. How do I say your last name, Esther?
Wojcicki.
Wojcicki. Her other daughter is a Fulbright scholar, and her third daughter, Anne, founded 23andMe, which is, of course, really interesting for those of us at Tend. So Esther is widely heralded as the most successful parent and educator in the US. Esther offers essential lessons for parents across the globe into raising, educating, and managing people to their highest potential. So thank you, Esther, for joining us today. I can't wait to have you share your story and your tips for us parents. And as I said at the start, please record your reactions and add any questions into the chat. I'll leave it to you now, Esther.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, honored to be here, actually. I am sorry that I am not there in person, but it's certainly easier for me to be here on Zoom than it is for me to have to fly across the world, actually, not just the country. So I'm going to talk to you today about why helicopter parenting produces unhappy adults. And at the other extreme, why overly permissive parenting also produces unproductive adults. And they're not only unproductive, they're also unhappy. So I thought I would just clarify those two things. So this is what I'm going to be talking about. I just want you to know there are 6 different styles of parenting, popular styles of parenting. So I want you to understand what I'm going to be doing. Attachment parenting is when the parents are overly concerned with attachment, and that's all they focus on, is being attached to their child. Helicopter parenting is what I'm going to be talking about. And permissive parenting, those two, the green one and the purple one. Authoritarian parenting is when the parent basically is like a dictator in charge. The child has to do exactly what the parent says. That's authoritarian parenting. And it's a little confusing because the other one, authoritative parenting, means that you are authoritarian, but you give your child reasons why you're doing what you're doing. And then, of course, there's uninvolved parenting, which is like people that just ignore their kids. So as I said, I'll be talking about helicopter parenting and permissive parenting. So with regard to helicopter parenting, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And so it isn't just a buzzword, it's a type of child centrism approach. You'll see this is on the screen. It's bad for both a parent and a child's well-being. So it is basically the parent tries to do everything to make the child successful. And there are multiple studies out there, which if I talked about the studies, I probably wouldn't be able to talk about anything else. But you can find them online about the detrimental impact of helicopter parenting. And a lot of these studies assess kids at the age 2, 5, and 10. And these controlling parents, the main goal that they have is to help their child be the best they can be. So what I say is that it really comes from good intentions. So these parents are trying to help these kids be the best they can be. And they don't want them to suffer at all. They want to give them like the perfect life. And that unfortunately doesn't prepare them for life, because life, as we all know, isn't perfect. And so they lack a lot of self-confidence and a lot of skills for adapting to problems that they may encounter. So one of the main things that they have is poor emotional regulation. So helicopter parenting is associated with poor emotional and behavioral regulation at the age of 5. Researchers found that a greater a child's emotional regulation at age 5, the less likely he or she was to have emotional problems, and more likely she was to have a better social skills. So if they can regulate their emotions early, they will be able to regulate their emotions when they're teenagers. So it's very difficult for kids to change once they already start on a particular path. So I gave a talk, that's me in the black and white jacket. I gave a talk with Amy Chua. Amy Chua is the tiger mom. She wrote the book about being a tiger parent. And I have this video from YouTube here where Amy and I had a debate over what's better, controlling your child, making sure that they can always be the best in the class, preparing them nonstop for anything that they might encounter in life, versus me, where I did not do that. I was the parent that, I gave kids a normal opportunity, but I did not try to control their life. So we're not going to watch this movie because it is 13 minutes long. But what you can do, they are going to send you a copy of this film so that you can watch it. And there's her book on the left. It's called The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. It was super popular until my book came along, which is called How to Raise Successful People. And in German, my book is called Panda Mama, just so you know. It's in 27 languages around the world right now, and including China, Vietnam, Korea, and even in Taiwan. And so I've had a lot of interesting feedback from all these different countries. But what I'd like you to do when you watch this video, you want to check and see who won this debate. And the audience they indicate who won the debate by who got the greatest applause and who got a standing ovation. So you might want to check out the video. It's pretty interesting. So this is what Amy Chua's daughters could not do. She had 2 daughters. She still has them. They're adults now. They could not attend a sleepover. They could not have a play date, be in a school play, complain about not being in a school play, watch TV or play computer games. They couldn't choose their own extracurricular activities. They couldn't get any grade less than an A. A- didn't work either. They could not be anything other than the number 1 student in the class. They had to play an instrument they could not play any instrument other than a piano or a violin. And so they both played piano. So that's just The ultimate tiger mother is what Amy Chua represents. So this is the sign of a helicopter parent that you might be dealing with. They let their child only play on playgrounds with shredded rubber mulch. The first thing they might have done is when your fourth grader came home crying from school because her best friend called her a name, is to call her friend's mom to sort it out. So instead of letting the kids sort it out, the parents called each other. If the parent is up at 11 o'clock rewriting the child's English essay, that's an indication of a tiger mom or a tiger dad, for that matter. There are more signs. If you wouldn't let them help out in the kitchen or cleaning because knives are sharp and cleaning fluids are dangerous. So instead of teaching them how to deal with both of these, they just don't let them do it. If they have, this is, as you can see, targeted to tiger parents. Your son having a meeting with the teacher, when she asks him a question, the parent answers it for him. I'm sure you've seen this. Your child doesn't get accepted to his preferred major at college, so you call the chair of the department to negotiate for an exception. So helicopter parents hurt kids regardless of the love or support. This is what all the studies say. They do not help at all. It's such an epidemic here in the United States that the University of California at Berkeley, one of the largest universities in the United States, probably in the world, now has a new class started about 4 years ago called adulting. And guess what the adulting class teaches? Teaches kids how to do their own laundry, how to cook simple things that they might never have learned, like how to boil an egg, how to heat up soup, teaches them how to manage a bank account, teaches them all the things that they should have learned, but they didn't learn because they are the children of helicopter parents. This is another book that I think is interesting for you to know about. This is written by the former dean of admissions at Stanford to help curb the helicopter parenting at Stanford. What was happening is that many of these kids were getting into Stanford, and then their parents were renting apartments in Palo Alto so they could be next to their kids while their kids were going to college. And frequently what happened is that if the kid was not getting an A in the class, the parent would call the professor. And so she wrote this book saying how to raise an adult because there were just too many of these helicopter parents doing that. So 5 problems with kids with overprotective parents. These are some of the 5 problems. Number 1, they tend to have more health problems. They found that most helicopter kids never learn to manage their health because their parents always told them when to go to sleep, when to exercise, and what to eat. So this is another outcome. Helicopter parents can cause binge drinking. So kids never learn to self-regulate, so they get to college and they binge drink. So unfortunately, in Palo Alto, we've had 2 cases where kids with these helicopter parents went to college and did do this binge drinking, and then unfortunately, they died. So, we're hoping not to have any more helicopter parenting. It doesn't allow kids to think. It also leads, there's a question about, does it lead to addiction? It could lead to addiction and other mental health issues. I think the main mental health issue it seems to lead to is kids that are afraid to take a risk. So these are all articles about why helicopter parenting is bad for your teen's health. And we're trying here in the US, a lot of writers, editors are trying to explain to parents that this is really not the way to raise your children. Second characteristic, they feel entitled. Well, of course they feel entitled because they've been treated like they're little kings and queens since the day they were born. So you'll get a copy of this presentation and you'll be able to read all these slides. I don't want to read them now to you because I might not be able to get done in time. Number 3, they have emotional problems. They grow up without learning to regulate their emotions. I think I mentioned this previously. And they tend to burn out and have a harder time transitioning to the real world. They rely a lot on medication. And do you know the number of kids in the US today that are on medication for anxiety or for anything related to depression? The number one thing they do, they run to the doctor and get a pill so that they don't have any anxiety. And it does lead to abuse. A lot of the studies show that. So this is again another, these are the 5 characteristics of kids with helicopter parenting. They lack self-regulation. This is a study published in 2017 on academic motivation. Many of them are not academically motivated because they don't have anybody there pushing them. So the skills for life that are missing, they're missing managing their time, managing money, getting from one place to another, communicating with others, maintaining their environment, healthcare, self-management, stress management, and building personal relationships. So these are problems that we see with helicopter parenting. Kids do need routines to feel secure. It helps them, it eliminates power struggles, it helps kids cooperate, makes them in charge of their own activities. And kids learn the concept of looking forward to things when they plan, when they feel, and then they feel secure. Regular routines help kids get on a schedule so they can teach themselves how to manage their time. So now here is the other side, overly permissive parents. Can you imagine? I mean, parents are confused today, so they don't know whether to be helicopter parents or or then they end up being overly permissive, or they, as I showed you, there's 6 different styles of parenting. At the end, I'll give you an example of what I think is probably the most effective. So permissive parenting, why it's bad for your child. So this is the dark side of being raised by permissive parents. Were you raised with fewer rules? So usually with permissive parents, there is no schedule. Just do what you want. Lack of structure. Get up when you want, eat when you want, do your homework when you want. Whatever you want to do, that's okay. And those kids also end up with a lot of problems, especially in school. So that's one side of permissive parenting. So permissive and indulgent parents rarely say no to their kids' demands. You want a toy now? Sure, we'll get it. Let's go to Target and buy a new toy. What toy did you want? Oh, yes, we'll go buy it. Or food. They use toys or foods as bribes. I've seen this side too, because these parents say, well, I'm not a helicopter parent. I'm just trying to allow my child to do whatever they want. So they're overly lax, overly lenient. They lack control. They don't monitor or guide their kids' behavior. No rules. So kids, of course, coming from that environment have low achievement. It's not surprising. Their parents have little expectations for them, and so the kids don't have any expectations for themselves. They watch TV as much as they want. They play computer games whenever they want. They do whatever they want. The kids make very poor decisions because there's no structure. So the structure helps us all get along. So we eat breakfast at a certain time. We eat lunch. We eat dinner at another time. There are special rules. At dinner time, we eat and we don't have our phones at dinner. And we eat all together. So, without these rules and structure, kids do really poorly. And then these kids of permissive parents make poor decisions because they don't have any experience doing that. They also tend to be more prone to delinquency and substance abuse. These are all research studies that are out there. They have difficulty with self-discipline. Not so surprising, they never had any discipline. Not born with self-discipline. Instead, we learn it by internalizing the structure that our parents provide us growing up. So if there's no structure, no discipline. If your parents didn't enforce enough rules and limits and structure when you were growing up, then you'll be far more likely to struggle with this as an adult. So here is my idea, what I did. And I'll just have this slide, hopefully I put it in another time, but this is the key to the presentation. So my philosophy is TRICK, and TRICK stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. So I suggest that you trust your child as much as you can for their particular age. So I start out by saying that the main thing that you need to do when your child is an infant is to, in the first 3 months, 4 months, they need to learn to put themselves to sleep. And so you need to give them a pat on the back, help them settle down, and then they need to learn to self-soothe and put themselves to sleep. Why? Because then they feel more in control of their life right then and there, just to start. Of course, there are kids that have colic. There's a lot of exceptions, but if you have a normal kid, that is one thing that you can do. And I've had a lot of experience with kids doing this, and so far it works. I also lived in France when my third daughter was born, and there's a book about French parenting out there also, and the French have this thing, well, I don't know if they call it the French pause, but I do. So when the child is squeamish or crying or just irritated, they pat them on the back, and then they give them a minute or two or maybe longer to see whether they can't calm down themselves. And it seems to work all over France. And so this is a system that I also used with my kids. I actually did it with my older 2 kids who were born in the United States. And I didn't know about the French pause at that time, but I just did it instinctively. And it worked. And then it worked for all my friends that the group that I was involved with. So when you trust your kids as they get older, they trust themselves. If you trust them, for example, to, help clear the table, they feel good about themselves because now they have that skill for helping to clear the table. Respect. Respect is important because when you respect their ideas, basically in my definition, respect means listening to their ideas. Doesn't mean that you have to do it. It means you listen to what they have to say, and then you can talk about it and discuss it. I give them as much independence as possible for their age. It's, of course, determined by age. I collaborate with them instead of dictating. I explain what I'm trying to do and then get their input. And then I treat them with kindness. So I didn't just do this as a parent. I did this in my classes, my school. This philosophy is in my book, which is called How to Raise Successful People. As I said, it's in 27 languages to date. It's coming out in the 28th language in the fall in Arabic. And these are my 3 daughters, Susan, who's wearing blue, Janet wearing black, and Anne wearing red. And this is what they do today. Or I didn't tell you. Actually, I'll tell you what they do today. Susan today is the CEO of YouTube. And Janet is a professor of pediatrics at the University of California, San Francisco. And Anne is the founder of 23andMe, the personal genetics company. So they all came up with their own ideas of what they wanted to do themselves, by the way. I did not impact them. I didn't tell them what to do. I didn't tell them where to go to college. I didn't tell them anything other than I supported them and their ideas. So I also do that in my classes. So this is one of the classes. I have a program at Palo Alto High School. It's actually today the largest media program in the United States. There are between 700 and 800 kids in this program. And the philosophy I talked about, TRIC, trust, respect, independence, collaboration, kindness, is what I used in this program to build it up to where it is today. It started with 20 people in 1984, and kids joined the program because they were given a lot of freedom to work on things that they wanted to work on and work together. So this picture is a typical picture. If you came into the class, this is exactly what you would see. Kids working in groups. This is another one of the classes, and the kids are organizing this. I took the picture. The kids are organizing themselves. The publications that they produce, I'll show you in just a minute. It's another picture of the classes. My classes usually ran to between 60 and 70 kids in one class. How did I do that? I did that because I allowed them to work in groups, come up with their own ideas. I followed the TRIC philosophy. I trusted them, respected their ideas, gave them a lot of independence, collaborated with them instead of dictate, and always treat them with kindness. So this is an example of the work that these kids produce. They're between the ages of 15 and 18. This is a 3-section, 28-page newspaper that comes out every third week. In addition to that, there's magazines. Today we have 10 publications. These magazines are 80 pages long. They come out every 6 weeks. Everything in these publications is produced by kids. They lead the publication. They come up with their own story ideas. They do the layout design. They do the graphics. They do everything. I teach the software. And the way that I teach it is I teach it in the beginning journalism class, and I teach the basics. And then I expect them to get the more sophisticated ways to use it online by learning how to search intelligently and follow online programs. And as you can see, it works. This is another publication called Verde. And again, these are all their ideas of what they, and their graphics and their design. So this is the introduction to my book. First sentence: there are no Nobel Prizes for parenting or education, but there should be. There are the two most important things we do in our society. How we raise and educate our children determines not only the people they become, but the society we create. So I can't express how passionate I am about helping parents be more effective and helping teachers be more effective in the classroom. I think some of the problems that we're facing today in the world are the result of poor education practices and or poor parenting practices. So right now that is the, sorry, it keeps changing. That is the end of the presentation. And now I'll be happy to take questions from any of you at this point.
Hi, Esther, thank you. That was really interesting. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to do my juggle right now. I'm just going to sign out of this one. I was just going to say to you, I find it quite interesting in this age, the day and age with technology and children and social media. Can you please talk to that for a second and your thoughts on social media and, technology with children?
Could you repeat the question again?
Sorry, so I'm interested on your view on social media with children, and in particular on technology and social media. So, like, how is social media kind of impacting helicopter parenting? What are the key trends that you're seeing? How can parents support, or should they step out of it? Or what's kind of the key things that you're observing there?
So social media has had the biggest impact of all on parenting. And the reason it has is because today parents can compare their child to not only the child next door, but to thousands of other kids online. And they worry about their kid is not getting the right thing. Their kid is not going to be able to get into college. Their child needs this and that. And so it's had a not the best experience, not great situation for parents, because they feel worried and bad that maybe their kid is not going to be able to measure up. And then, so that's for the parents. So what happens with the kids is that the kids become addicted to social media and to cell phones because they watch their parents who are addicted. And so, they even have play, like imitation iPhones that are little play phones. So kids can act like their parents and pretend they're on their phone. And then parents tend to give kids the actual device when they're like 1 or 2 years old. And then they wonder why their kid is addicted when in fact they gave the child the device. My recommendation, and the recommendation, by the way, of the United Nations, is kids under 5 years old should not be getting any electronic devices. No iPads, no phones, nothing. That's a time when they should be learning how to interact with the world, learning how to interact with other kids, and not focused on learning their letters or their colors or their numbers on an iPad. They will have plenty of time later on to learn that, but they are learning how to get along in the world and social skills. So I think, unfortunately, social media and the phones and electronic devices are having a negative impact on parents and their kids.
And how do you think that parents with older children, say teenagers, should be setting rules and frameworks around that? Or do you think that it's mostly just trusting them and respecting them with devices? Or how do you scaffold them in that process?
So what I talked about, you have to give them structure. You tell them, there's how many hours in a day, 24 hours. How many hours should you be sleeping? What are the recommendations for how many hours to sleep? Why should you sleep that number of hours? Why should you devote a certain number of hours to eating? And then within that structure, how many hours is recommended for kids to be on an electronic device? And then after that, the best thing to do is to let them self-manage within those structures that you've set up. So in other words, teenagers, how many hours do you want to be on social media watching what other kids are doing? Why don't you share with them what the research shows about how detrimental it is for them to be on social media all the time?
Good. Interesting.
Bad for everything. But if you try to control them, they will not control themselves.
Yeah.
You need to give them the tools to control themselves. And one of the things, so I have all these grandchildren, 10 to be honest. And so how do we control them? First of all, they learned to tell time pretty early. They all got clocks, not just little tiny clocks, big clocks. And you put that clock there and they get to see what time is and how much time they should be on a device of one kind or another. How much time should they be gaming? How much time should they spend on their homework and so forth? You let them help you manage their time and then pass that responsibility to them. If they don't do it well, then you bring up the subject again and you start again. This is what research shows. This is what you should be doing. Don't, you have to think about how do you want to, manage your life. They can
Amazing.
do
I was
as
going to say,
early.
we've got a follow-up question in terms of helping children, and in particular in terms of helicopter parenting. Sophia's asking, how do you encourage a child that struggles with their learning at school without becoming a helicopter parent? I guess what she's asking is, if your child is really struggling, how do you support them in the same way as you empower them? How do you help support and empower them at the same time?
But what you need to do, first of all, is figure out what are they struggling with? What is the main problem they're struggling with? And then the helicopter parent, will try to do the work for the child. And the parent that I call the trick parent, maybe we should just call it that, tries to understand the problem and tries to help the child learn how to do whatever it is they aren't doing well in and empower them. The idea is for them to be able to revise whenever they do it wrong without repercussions. So in my classes, my students were always allowed to revise all the work they did without worrying about getting a bad grade, because otherwise they have writer's block. No one wants to do anything if they're worried about the grade. And
Yeah,
so
interesting.
cut out the grade completely.
And how do you think that, people working in healthcare, I mean, we're seeing increasing, as you talked about at the start of this, you talk about mental health and the impact it has on so many children with anxiety and the medications, in particular in the US, that get prescribed at a younger and younger age. What type of role do you think healthcare providers play in this, and how can healthcare providers support parents to be, to be able to prevent these issues down the track?
Well, I think the main thing, first of all, you have to make it clear to kids that the world is no picnic. That there's always a challenge, and the idea is that you can overcome that challenge no matter what it is. And instead of calling this generation they lost 2 years of schooling, saying that they've got all these problems because they lost all these years of schooling, what we've done, at least in my family and with my students, is I said, you guys have you're more advanced in how to cope with difficult situations. You've got special opportunity to have learned this. And so you know more what to do when you can't go to school. So what you want to do is make your kid aware of the challenges in life and teach them how to overcome those challenges. Don't do it for them.
Great.
Help them overcome those challenges themselves. Because
Just picking up, I was going to say, just picking up, sorry, Esther, on what you talked about with the pandemic and with lockdowns. In particular in New Zealand, we've had quite a long lockdown in Auckland, from August last year for the best part of 3 or 4 months. And most of our children have missed a huge amount of school. They've missed out on that engagement and interaction. They've missed out on learning how to say hello and shake hands because people are concerned about COVID. So what are your key tips for parents kind of hopefully coming, how to shape these kids that have lost these 2 years?
So I would say that a lot of the skills they lost, the main skill they lost is social interaction.
Mm.
Everything else can be made up later on. They're not reading as fast. They're not doing math as quickly. You can make that up later. What you can't make up is social skills. So whatever you can do to help kids feel better about themselves and say, doesn't matter. I can just tell you for a fact, my husband grew up in Poland during World War II. He didn't go to school until he was 12 years old. And, he ended up being professor of physics at Stanford. You don't have to learn all these things really early. You can learn them later. But what you need to learn is self-confidence, belief in yourself, that you can do it no matter what the challenge is. And that's what we should have these kids thinking now. They spent all this time in a pandemic isolated, so they are missing social skills. I would let them socialize online if you can with their friends. They can do one-to-one Zoom calls, by the way. I found that those are the most effective of all, one-to-one or two-to-one, and have kids talk to each other, things like that. Or have a small group of kids. You don't need a lot. You just need a few kids, 2 or 3, and then they can learn to get along. They can do whatever you say, learn to shake hands, learn to smile at each other, learn to say hello. If you can do it with a couple kids, you can do it with more kids.
Yeah.
And so that's what, stop making them feel so bad about themselves that they lost out on 2 years of whatever. I mean, here in the US, our kids lost out on 2 years. You're only talking about a few months.
Yeah, it depends on where you are in New Zealand. Some of us have had longer lockdowns, but actually today is a really good example. My parents haven't had my son, a huge amount, our younger son, because of the pandemic. And this is the first time that he's properly at their house. And with our younger two, they started going to the grandparents at 2 months, and he's almost 8 months and has never really been. And so it's a different experience, right? And I guess it's about adapting. And I think the social interaction aspect of that is probably the most important part.
That is the most important part. Well, it's good that they're able to be there now. And so, I mean, you can't cry over spilled milk. There's nothing you can do about what we had. But what you can do is learn how to live and to succeed in spite of what we had.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question around parental guilt, because a lot of this is kind of like, well, this is the way that this is your recommended parenting method. And I know a lot of parents over the last year, I think it's been a really challenging time to be a parent. A lot of us have been working from home, juggling, trying to homeschool our children, and at the same time kind of look after obviously their emotional and mental well-being and all of these other aspects. And so, that parental guilt aspect, with people feeling as if they're already struggling, how would you recommend parents think about that and reframe that conversation?
Again, I think it's a discussion. So if I can just tell you, Susan, my oldest daughter, she managed YouTube, all of YouTube, that grew 30% in this pandemic. It's the largest website in the world. She managed it all from home, and she has 5 kids.
Yeah, wow. Amazing.
So, what you do is your kids become your support team. You teach them to help you, which is what she did. She had her youngest child, who's 7, well, she was 6 then, in charge of vacuuming. That kid vacuumed the whole house, and this is a big house. And then she had another one who was 9, who was in charge of making breakfast, and another one that was in charge of doing all the laundry, because we couldn't have, there was no help. Nobody could come in.
It's quite funny. We've had a very similar circumstance in our family where our 10-year-old often takes the baby because he's very good with the baby and he loves hanging out with him. And then our daughter, all helping each other. But I was going to say, I've had a few more questions raised. So one of our team members has asked that the question, being raised in Polynesian culture with spanking kids is good for disciplining children. Do you think that this is something that really is good for raising successful children? And the second question being, what is your recommendation for very clingy children?
All right, so I'm against any kind of spanking. Spanking not only hurts the parent, but it hurts the kid. It's terrible. So it's better to talk to the child. The child's not doing that because they're trying to be nasty. They're doing that because they're kids and they don't know what's better from what's not good. And so I think it really hurts the child psychologically. And
sorry, just to follow up on that, Esther, if that's a tool that you've been used and you've been taught as a child that is the way to do it, how would you recommend, I guess, for those that have got younger toddlers that struggle with that and they're moving away from that, if it's a cultural thing, what are the key things that you would say to a parent that's thinking about those things?
So the main thing I would say is you have to put it on the conscious level. It has to be conscious. You have to, that's why I did this trick formula. So you always have to say, it's better for me to talk to my child than it is for me to hit my child. You have to say that to yourself. And the reason you have to say it to yourself is because, you know, people tend to parent the way they were parented. They were hit all the time. And so it's instinctive for them. So they have to actually tell themselves, I'm not going to hit my child. I'm going to talk to them and see whether or not there isn't a way for them to stop doing that. And it works. So I grew up being hit all the time. My family, my father was from Russia. And the Russian method of child rearing is spoil the child, spare the rod. You know, so if you didn't hit your kids, you were going to spoil them. That was the methodology. And I got it, actually, it's backwards. It's spare the rod, spoil the child. And so for me personally, I had to take myself in hand and say, I am going to talk to this kid and I'm not going to hit them.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do it if the whole culture does that.
So that's a great response. Thank you for sharing that. And we've actually had a few more questions come in. So let me work through. So the secondary question was, how do you deal with very clingy children? And also, how do you undo helicopter parenting? So how do you undo the effects of helicopter parenting that are now being seen among your teenagers? So I guess dealing with the clingy question first, is there a way to be able to raise confidence? And the secondary, the teenage helicopter parenting undoing?
So the clingy child is the child that feels insecure and doesn't know how to cope in the world by themselves. Either they've been hurt or spanked, or they've been ridiculed, or something's happened that they cling to the child because they're afraid of the world. So what you need to do is help them cope with their environment, whatever it is. And clingy children turn out to be super shy kids that don't want to interact with other kids. And then the older the child, the bigger the problem. You know, if you have like a 12-year-old that is clingy, it's really hard to change that. So I'm sorry that is really
Okay.
hard.
I was
But I
going to,
think the main
yeah.
thing you can do with a child like that is to slowly give them little things that they can do where they can be successful. So then they will have more confidence in themselves.
Excellent. So, there's three more questions. I'm really aware that we're going over time, Esther. Apologies for that, but I think there's some pertinent questions coming in at the end here. So, with publishing across multiple languages and cultural groups, you know, how have you found that your work has been applied from a cross-cultural perspective?
I think it's very effective cross-culturally. As a matter of fact, you know, Susan, the CEO of YouTube, is married to a Costa Rican. And so there's a very different culture. And so they've managed to do a great job teaching the kids both cultures, and the kids are all bilingual, Spanish and English.
Wow, amazing. I was
And
going to, yeah.
it's important. And that's what actually I did in my classes. I tried to celebrate kids from all over the world because we had a lot of people from the South Pacific Islands that lived in East Palo Alto that also came to Palo Alto High School. And, you know, instead of feeling like you're a second class person because you're an immigrant, I tried to make them feel like they're special because not only did they get to enjoy American culture, but they could share the culture they came with. So everybody, we all got along. We celebrated everything. I'm not kidding. It gave me an opportunity to have more holidays than I ever thought about.
Wonderful. And so before we cut out, Sam's got a final question on technology. So what's the difference between giving a child an iPad now versus watching Play School TV when she was younger? Is the interactive element of this what makes it worse, or is it the exposure? What do you think the differences are?
So, by the way, you don't have to rush. It's okay with me because
Okay,
I
good.
don't mind staying. I can tell you that the thing about the iPad that's better is that it is interactive. You've got to respond. The television is passive, and people don't learn much from passive just watching. I mean, if you learned a lot from passive watching, that would mean you could learn how to ride a bike by watching someone else do it. You know, you
That's a
have
good
to.
analogy. I like that. It's a great analogy. Yeah.
So, as with the iPad, you know, I do like the iPads better, but I won't introduce them until the child is 5 or at the earliest 4. I see all these parents who want their kid to learn the colors early and the numbers early so that they can then somehow show everybody how smart their kids are. I'd like to remind them that, you know, your child is not like your pet. This is not a pet show. You know, they will learn their colors and their numbers in time. All kids learn it, just like all kids learn to be toilet trained. You know, no one asked them when they were toilet trained.
Well, that's a lovely way to end, Esther. Thank you for a wonderful session. It's been really insightful to have you here with us in New Zealand. And gosh, I hope it stops snowing in Napa. It doesn't sound terribly appealing.
It's not very much fun because I brought shorts with me.
Yeah.
So it was supposed to be warm here, and now, but I'm not the only one. Everybody else here we're all waiting for the snow to go away.
Oh, God. Well, in New Zealand, we still have sunshine, thankfully, and we're heading into winter in a few weeks' time. So thank you again so much for today. We really appreciate your session. And for anyone who's watching, we'll be posting a copy of this webinar and emailing you one directly as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
and
Bye.
enjoy New Zealand's weather.
Thank you.